Every day you and I get bombarded with negative news. Just like the body becomes what we eat, the mind becomes what we're putting in. It is important to listen to stories that not only gives you hope, but also inspires you and uplifts you. In this podcast, we're interviewing experts who will break down the solutions to the world's most pressing problems. And I promise you, if you listen to this podcast, you will not only stay informed, but you will also feel more energy in your life. Welcome to Great.com Talks with. The topic of today is the forest. Why is it important to protect the forest and how? And to understand that, we have invited Karen Van der Westhuizen, who is the communications director at Forest Stewardship Council. So I want to say welcome to this interview, Karen.
Thank you so much, Spirit, and I'm so honored to be here. I love talking about the work that we do and about the importance of forests, so it's a real honor for me. Thank you for giving me this time.
What I really would like you to do here for us to understand the picture of the forest, why is it important to talk about the forest? What are we protecting and how big is the problem? Could you help us go into that direction?
Yeah. Of course. I think, anytime you open up a newspaper today, you're going to read about climate change, and you're going to read also about the effects of climate change. So the strange weather that's happening all over the world, or very recently in the last few days, we've heard about how biodiversity is decreasing at alarming rates across the world. And this is all related to the loss of forest cover. So forests are being lost at an incredible amount all over the world, particularly in the rainforests. And the rainforests are those that sort of form around the equator, and they are the richest places on Earth for biodiversity and for other elements like storing of carbon. That's also equally important to combat climate change. So it's really important that people are aware of the value of forests, and also how they can play a role in protecting forests.
Right. So it has never been, the situation with forests has never been as bad as it is. That could sum up what you're trying to say, or that we need to address the forest because it's disappearing.
That's exactly it. The situation has never been as bad as it currently is. Yeah.
And how much forest are we talking about that is at the currently unprotected? How much is it threatening risk?
I think most forest is at risk. Wherever there's money to be made from a forest, I think it gets to be at risk. You do have programs like the one of the Forest Stewardship Council that protects forests in different ways. But our coverage across the globe is we protect around 20% of forests at this stage. So there's so much more that can be exploited. We mustn't forget. I mean, I say FSC protects around 20%. There are also other players who are protecting the forests, and that includes indigenous communities. So people who have for centuries, who have lived in the forest, and they are the natural guardians of the forest. But at the same time, again, if you pick up a newspaper, you're likely to find a story about an indigenous community that's been pushed out of their forest so that somebody can make money from it. So I think as soon as there's money to be made, there's an opening for exploitation of forest.
That helps to understand the picture. 20% at FSC, and when you say FSC, you mean Forest Stewardship Council.
Forest Stewardship Council, that's right, yes. And I brought along the logo because most people don't know the name, but they'll recognize the tick tree logo. So you'll see this on many, many products that you buy in the store, and that's who FSC is.
And it says 25 years in the making. So you've been around for 25 years.
25 years, that's correct, yes.
Tell us more about what's the role that FSC is playing to protect the forest.
Okay, so our logo at FSC is Forest for All Forever, and that's exactly what we do. So we make sure that forests meet the needs of society. So remember that one of the important roles of forests is that you're getting wood for furniture, as you can see here, you know, the material that goes into your books, the paper that makes up the books, things that make up coffee cups, even textiles now are being made out of forest materials. So we are making sure that forests are able to supply the needs of society while they can be there for many, many generations to come. And we do this by setting in place a bunch of rules. We call them standards, okay, that make sure that the forest is managed in such a way that there's minimal environmental damage when we cut a log. When we cut a tree, there's minimal damage to the environment. This means the biodiversity is protected. This means that things like the stability of the soil is maintained, that the cleanliness of the water in the forest is maintained, and all the other factors that go into it. And we do this by mimicking as much as we possibly can, by mimicking the actions of nature. The other thing that we have to keep in mind is that you can't say that forest management is sustainable if the people who live and work in the forest don't have a say in how that forest is managed. So the other very important part of FSC certification is to make sure that those people, the people who live and work in the forest, their needs are taken care of. And this includes many things like ensuring that if we are going into a forest to take out some of the trees, that we make sure that things like religious rights of Indigenous communities are preserved and respected, that communities that live in the forest are still able to access the forest for their needs like medicine. They have berries and roots and things for medicines or dyes or whatever it is they need. And then we also make sure that people who work in the forest, so who actually are responsible for harvesting the timber, have a decent wage, have good and safe working environments, that they have all the training that they need. So it's a very holistic approach to making sure that a forest is run sustainably. And when you see the logo that I showed you, that tick tree logo on your product, that's when you know that the material that's made up that product has come from a forest that's been managed according to those standards. So we've been able to take the material out of the forest, but in the end, there's no net loss of forest, and the communities who live there are getting a benefit from it.
Could you then almost say that if there's a conflict of interest in a forest, some people want to shop it down because they maybe need to support their families. Some people just want an economical return of investment. And then there's people who want to protect it. You're gathering all of these different players and kind of make a conversation? Is that
Well, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So, as I said, we have the standards in place so that people who are working, the companies who are going in to take the timber out of the forest can do all the things that I've described. We also make sure there's a market at the end of it so that the organizations who use the material for packaging or for books or for furniture or for whatever know that they're going to get some value from using FSC certified timber. So it's a case of creating a demand as well for that timber.
And people who maybe just want to exploit the forest, would they be open to implement those standards? Is this a tricky conversation negotiation to have, or does that come easily that people want to implement this?
Yeah, it can be tricky. I think, on the whole, people generally want to preserve the resources of the planet, and some people do things out of ignorance rather than out of meaning to be destructive, I beg your pardon. So yes, people are very open to accepting the FSC certification and the FSC label. There are, of course, those who just want to make money and who don't care how they do it, unfortunately. Yes, we do try and engage them, and we do try and bring about a change, but sometimes this is not always possible.
And give us some example of what that standard would look like. What are we talking about with that standard?
Okay. Well, I want to tell you a little bit. Actually, we spoke about exploitation, and I had a wonderful experience recently in Kenya. I met a woman called Marcy, who lives in rural Kenya. Now, she doesn't live in a forest. There are no forests in the part of Kenya that she lives in. She lives in sort of a savanna-like environment with, started with shrubs, indigenous shrubs that grow naturally in the area. Now, 5 years ago, a group of loggers pitched up at her door, and she had some trees. She had 4 trees growing on her property, old trees that had been there for many, many decades. And the logger said to her, "We'll give you $50 if you let us cut down these trees." And of course, you know, Marcy, being in rural Kenya, she lives on the edge of poverty. She needed money to send her children to school, and she agreed. And she said, "Yes, please take them, give me the money." She was very happy to get the money, and it did pay for her children's school fees for the rest of the year. The trouble is, once the money had gone, the trees were gone, and there was no more way, you know, there was no other way for her to make money. And many of the people in the area that Marcy lives in faced a similar sort of situation. But there's a local charity in that area as well. And the charity got together and wanted to find a way, a sustainable way for people to make money from the richness of the environment around them. So what they did was they looked at these indigenous shrubs, and they came up with a way for people to harvest the old growth of the shrubs to make charcoal and sell that. So they came in and they took Marcy and they trained her on what does old growth look like. So how do you make sure that the shrubs are there, they stay intact, but you're taking off as much as you need to make a decent batch of charcoal. They gave her a bin. It was a big drum, probably about 1.5 meters tall, sort of as wide as you could, you know, spread your arms like that, and they taught her how to safely make charcoal in this drum. That included things like making a fire break, how to protect your lungs from the smoke. So they gave her all the equipment she needed, how to protect her eyes from the smoke. Again, they gave her the goggles to do that, and they taught her how to take these scraps from the shrubs and make charcoal from them. She then took that charcoal to the charity, who had a facility to compress it into blocks that looked like a normal building brick, and then the charity sold it at the local market. It also eventually got exported all around Kenya. Now, the charity only took enough money to pay for their expenses. The rest of the money went to her, went to Marcy, and she's been able to, since I met her, she's continuing to send her children to school, to feed the family. They've even bought some chickens and a couple of goats so that the eggs and the milk are now feeding the family. And she's been saving a little bit of money every batch of charcoal, and she's built a second room onto her little house that she had when I first got there. So this charcoal carries the FSC logo on it because it does everything that we say it's going to do. It protects the environment, it gives benefit back to the community, and there's a market for it. And you know, so this is really the sort of impact that we have on the ground. There are many other stories in Namibia, again using charcoal and taking out bush, non-indigenous bush that had sort of overgrown areas. We've created an area where cheetahs are now thriving because they can run and hunt like they used to. In Lithuania, a colleague of mine was there last week, where in one of the FSC certified forests, they're creating homes for a little dormouse that's a critically endangered list, you know. And a few years ago, if you were walking through the forest, you were lucky to see one, and now when you go for a walk through the forest, you might see 3 or 4 of them. So so it's all of these actions on the ground that really give value to our work and really help us to see the impact. You know, if you are working to save a forest, you really are impacting people's lives and the biodiversity in the forest.
I see why that example is very, it's quite away from my understanding of what I thought FSC would do. So now we're saying you're actually implementing sustainable solutions in any way that it's sustainable. People can provide for themselves. That could be a solution that FSC, as like a strategy, that the how that we're talking about on how you're
Well, we don't actually implement the solutions, but by us providing all the guidelines for, for the area to be managed sustainably, and also with our label providing the market for the products to be sold. Because let's face it, if there's no market, it's no good for Marcy to be going and gathering her shrubs every day and burning them. But the FSC label sort of gives that trust factor, so that there is a market. It's easier to create a market with it.
And thereby the counseling part. So you're counseling people to find the solutions themselves.
That's exactly it. It's empowering people.
Ah, thank you. That helps understand, really. And if a forest then, because you would certify do you certify parts of a forest, or do you certify products, villages? Is it?
So we certify parts of the forest. So some companies, especially these massive big forestry companies, they do different things in the forest. So they would ask us just to certify one of their forests or parts of many of the forests. But we also certify what we call chains of custody. So, for example, if a timber comes from a forest, it has the FSC certificate with it. It then goes to the mill where it gets turned into pulp, and that mill then has a certificate to put onto that bundle of pulp. It then goes to the paper manufacturer, who turns it into paper, and that manufacturer also has what we call a chain of custody certificate to make sure that the FSC logo goes onto that, and so on and so forth, until eventually you get a book, in the supermarket. So there's two different kinds of certification. There's the forest management, which is exactly what it says. It's for the forest, and the second one is the chain of custody certification, so that it can move from one area to the next.
So you're stepping directly into the market, and anytime a customer or someone who want to buy something see the logo of FSC, then you could be certain, okay, there's a sustainable production behind this product.
Yes, that the production was according to the FSC standards. Yes, that's correct.
Cool. Now I guess you've been expanding for 25 years, and that's already created a big impact. And I guess there's just endless of forest left to work with. How would you identify the places where you want to go into?
So we actually in the process of doing that right now. We're working with our members. We have over 1,000 individual and organizational members all over the world, representing the environmental experts, people, and charities that represent people, and then obviously the businesses who are all involved. And we're working with them at the moment to identify exactly what our strategy is going to be for the next few years. Tropical timber, I think, is definitely a place where we need to be. Most of everything to do with forests actually is in the tropical areas. Those are the ones around the equator that I explained. So this is certainly an area that we need to work in, and an area that we would like to expand in. And then the other one is, another area is what we call smallholders. And these are the people who own the tiny little forests, sort of forests that have been in the family for many generations. People like Marcy, who could quite easily be exploited for money, and who are looking for a way to make sure that the forest potentially makes a little bit of money, but also is there for generations to come. So that's the other area that we'd be looking at expanding into. I think both bring challenges. Obviously, if you're dealing with communities have, there's different needs, different cultures, different countries, different weather conditions, and one size doesn't always fit all, of course. So we need to really work very closely with communities to come up with things that ways that they can implement our standards, but in a way that's suitable to them. And also, if you look at many of the countries where the tropical forests are, there's high levels of corruption and other. There's high levels of poverty. So it's very difficult to work in those areas as well. So, so it's there's challenges along the way. None of this is easy. It all sounds easy as I talk about it, but none of it is easy. But I can tell you that we are determined not to step away because it's difficult. Our role is to protect the forests of the world, and we're going to do that regardless of how difficult it is.
We're starting to get closer towards the end here. Could you help us understand, could you paint the world if FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, had not existed the last 25 years? How would the world look differently? Is that a possible question for you to answer?
I think it would be quite a presumptuous question for me to answer, and I don't have anything to back me up on that. I can certainly answer a question about how, if people or organizations like FSC didn't exist, I wouldn't want to make it only FSC specific. I think there's so many other people out there who play a very important role as well. So would that be okay?
Yeah, my question is quite a mind trick experiment, so I see why that would be difficult to answer.
Okay.
Then how about you help us understand, what would you want people to do after listening to this interview? Where would you recommend people?
Well, people can do a very simple thing, and that is to look for our logo on products. Every time you buy a product with that logo on, you know that you are supporting a good cause, you're supporting the forest, and you're supporting the people who live in the forest, people like Marcy, who I've just explained, who I've just told you all about. There are bigger things that you can do, obviously, and there's many, many organizations around the world, WWF, the Rainforest Alliance, who have lots of information on their websites about how you can continue to protect forests, reduce your carbon footprint, and all the details. I'm not going to go into each of them, but please do go and have a look at what you can do. But a very simple step you can make is just to make sure that you're looking for that logo on your product when you go out and do your shopping next time.
Could you show us the logo again here?
Yes, of course. There we go. Can you see that? Okay,
Yeah.
so we call it the tick tree.
Tick tree. I do recognize that logo, so
Yeah.
I guess it's many people might be recognizing it.
That's it. When we say Forest Stewardship Council, sometimes people look at us a bit blankly, but as soon as you show the logo, you can see the recognition.
Yeah. Then the last thing here I want to leave with is there anything important that you would like for more people to understand about the forest, or about the cause area that we're talking about?
I think, I would love for people just to really appreciate the value of the forests. Forests have been something that have been around forever. So, we kind of treat them a little bit like we treat the air that we breathe. It's something that's there, and it's not going to, it won't go away. The problem is it is going away. So please be aware of that. And there are many, many things that you can do to protect the forest. I spoke about the logo. There's other things that you can do. Join the Fridays for Future demonstrations that are happening around the world. I believe many of them are still going on virtually despite COVID. Reduce your carbon footprint, do all the things that you need to do. But first and foremost, I think for you to really do those with passion is just to appreciate that without forests, there is no planet. We would be in a terrible, terrible place. So that, I think, would be my take-home message for everybody. Please protect the forests and appreciate their value.